And so I want to welcome all of you for taking time in the middle of your day, and I'm sure it's a very busy day given that these are the times of Zoom, to join this session. To me, seeing so many people join this session tells me that this is a topic that's near and dear to many people's hearts. So for those of you who are not aware of who the Gordon Institute is, at Tufts University, we are the professional institute for all leadership, management, and entrepreneurship degree programs and co-curricular activities at the university. We serve over 200 graduate students a year and over 600 undergraduates a year in our various degree programs and also in our various undergraduate and co-curricular activities. But most recently, what we've decided to do is reach out to the broader community and help serve even those who are not necessarily our degree students or even people who take our classes. Because we believe fundamentally that the experience that we bring to the table and the kinds of faculty that we have and our approach to leadership and management, which is to take a very pragmatic and a very hands-on approach to it, can be very relevant in these times when we're all learning to navigate times and experiences that we've never had to navigate before. We're fortunate today to have two experts on our call today. Diane Roberts, who actually is on our Industry Advisory Council for the Gordon Institute and is also the Director of Software at Sonos and also has deep experience directly managing remote teams. And also Stacy Lennon, who has been on our faculty and also one of our top faculty members for leadership and negotiation and conflict resolution. Stacy herself actually has professionally been in this industry for many years, advising many NGOs, including the World Bank and other organizations, as well as corporate clients. But we're fortunate that she carves time at the Gordon Institute to also teach our graduate students in the area of leadership and conflict resolution. So today, you can read their full bios on the Eventbrite, but at this point, what I'd like to do is turn it over to Stacy, who will be the moderator, and Diane, who's our guest panelist. Stacy.
Great, Kevin, thank you. I am excited about this hour that we are going to spend together, that we get to learn from and talk with a leader who's on the front lines of figuring this stuff out. How do we keep our teams together and thriving in these very abnormal times? So as Kevin mentioned, I teach at the Gordon Institute. My bread and butter is really around leadership and negotiation and conflict resolution. I actually spend most of my time working with people in industry, and leading teams is a central theme and challenge, even in normal times. So here we are in very abnormal times, and we face this challenge of keeping our teams together and thriving, as I mentioned. And so I'm thrilled to have this conversation with Diane. And just as an aside, I think you will just enjoy Diane. We had a very fun prep conversation last week that sort of whet my appetite for all that we're going to learn from her. So a few words of introduction to add on to what Kevin said about Diane. So Diane Roberts is the Director of Software Engineering at Sonos, and she's the site lead for Boston. Her experience is mostly in the consumer product space, and she holds degrees in computer science and music. Which I find interesting. Beyond that, Diane is a patented inventor, also very cool, and she's a public speaker and guest lecturer on building software in the real world. Now I'm going to let Diane add a little more color to that and give us even more of background as we jump into this conversation.
Sure. So thank you. And thank you, Stacy. And thank you to Kevin, Sarah, and Rebecca for hosting us and making this whole thing possible. Little like more on where I come from. Like consumer products is definitely my home turf and what I love working on. And working on speakers is kind of almost a calling given the dual degrees with the computer science and music. But what I really love is making teams of people. So I fancy myself a creative engineer of teams. How this feeds into what we're going to talk about today is my history and what I'm managing in the pre-COVID times versus now versus what I imagine coming in the future. In the pre-COVID times, I managed teams across 3 states and 4 different offices. They all went to the office, but they were in those different time zones, but within the United States. Now, in the COVID times, that same group of people, which actually has grown a bit, is in dozens of homes in whatever time zone they live in. And that is a different thing entirely. And I imagine going out of when the pandemic is over, when the after times come, hopefully. I'll be managing a complex team that has some people who go to the office and some people who don't, and some people who live near the office and some people who don't. And we'll have to figure out how to do that. And that will be new in its own unique way. So that's a little bit about me. We're going to actually pop up a poll next just to see a little bit about you all. So just to get an idea and help steer the conversation, if you could tell us like how big your team is and how many time zones you cover. So my team today is actually about 55 and covers three time zones. Although I do have one person who spends a month in Hawaii every year, which is always interesting. That adds difficulty. And then I coordinate heavily with people in Paris, and that adds another level of difficulty. The Paris to Seattle difference is a really unfortunate 9 hours. It's an interesting aspect of it. Awesome. So now we can see it. This is great. So it's interesting. It seems like the majority are working in a single time zone. So this must be, the shift must be even harder working in a single time zone with your team than it was for someone like me who's at least got the time zone thing and the multiple office thing. That's interesting. And yeah, we can definitely steer towards the single team size in some of the conversations.
All right, so we've got a little bit of a snapshot of who is here and sort of what you are engaging with. And so the way we thought we would have this conversation is Diane and I are going to have a little bit of back and forth around a few of the key themes that really emerged as we were talking this through last week. And I think we'll hit on a lot of the sort of bullet points are in the Eventbrite. And the first one we were actually going to jump into was this notion of time zones being a real thing. Now, just to note, like a lot of you are not, at least currently, dealing with a lot of time zone differences. But boy, that is a real challenge and probably an emerging and increasing challenge as organizations become even more virtual. And the future might be more virtual still as we realize we can actually get things done in this virtual way. So pre-COVID, there were challenges. I worked with clients, with global teams, and this has always been a challenge, even in normal times. And I'll just offer up a flavor of one of the challenges that I saw. And then Diane, I would love to hear from you how you handled it pre-COVID, how you're handling it now. So I once worked with a client who had a headquarters office on the eastern seaboard of the United States. And their biggest field office was 7 time zones away. And what started to emerge is that anytime headquarters and the field office needed to schedule a conversation, it was always getting scheduled at the convenience of the East Coast US office. And I don't think it was intentional on their part, but one of the things that they weren't managing very well was understanding how they were consistently asking their people 7 hours away to have evening meetings and weekend meetings or meetings scheduled on local holidays that were not a holiday in the US. So that's an example of the kinds of challenge that anyone has to manage at any time. But Dan, I'd love for you to just speak to this question, sort of pre-COVID, and then what's unique or novel or important about managing it during COVID?
There is definitely something about fairness, and I have a big, strong fair is important aspect of my personality, where when I hear stories about that 7 time zone difference, I would immediately jump to trying to solve that problem because it seems just, at some level that's rude. And it is unfair. And I mentioned the Paris to Seattle situation that I have going on here. We very specifically, the 11 a.m. Eastern hour happens to be 5 p.m. in Seattle, 5 p.m. in Paris and 8 a.m. in Seattle. And it is like the official collaboration hour of that, the people who work on that for the work that they're doing. It's kind of unfair for everyone but the East Coast, but doing it earlier would be untenable for Seattle and doing it later would be untenable for Paris. So we try to make sure that we clear that hour for those kinds of conversations to make sure that it's available for them. Mm-hmm. One of the other things we do globally, and this is something that doesn't matter pre or post, we host our all hands types meetings at at 3 times. So we might rebroadcast the same content 3 times throughout the time, or we might do we might actually have the speakers broadcast so they can answer real Q&A live at 3 different times throughout a 24-hour day. But it does seem like those of you on the call are mostly dealing with the smaller groups. So I'm going to talk about a slightly imaginary situation. I've got some names that have been replaced by a random name generator. Rob is Travis and Mary. Robert, Travis, and Mary, you can imagine like sitting in a conference room in a nice office building, if you remember what those look like, and having a great conversation about their design of this feature they're working on. And Avis is in Boston and she can't get a word in edgewise. And in the before times, Avis might talk to her manager about it, that she gets left out of the conversations, and the company may throw money at the problem. Awesome. Avis, do you like getting on airplanes? Let's go to Seattle and get everybody together for the next project kickoff, and they can all collaborate in a room together at the beginning of the next project, so they feel connected and they know each other a little better. And maybe Avis and Mary find some friendly common ground, and now they chat more off in Slack or whatever, and it brings the team a little closer together, and it reduces the friction of communication, and you can't do that now. So what's really interesting about the pandemic and everybody working from home is this actually gets better while incurring other problems. So in some ways you see it getting better with people. There's no more 3 people in a conference room drowning out the one person who's dialing in. Everyone is equally on Zoom. You get the tiles of the faces, and it's fair. But the new challenge is figuring out what tools to use for collaboration, because you can't stand around a whiteboard anymore. You can't all be in the same place touching the same things anymore. So when how we use a lot of Google Docs. We use a tool called Figma for UX designers that lets them kind of be co-editing the same things at the same time. We've actually dropped a lot of our heavier tools, even though they're better, because they work better for multiple people editing the same document on different computers, which is definitely an interesting thing. One of the things that I hope we can do is take some of the equal footing that you gain out of people all being on Zoom, and carry it forward into the after times. Like, how can we approach a team meeting in a 3-against-1 situation going in the future? But the other thing to consider in the time zone situation, and especially with everyone working at home and with their kids or their pets or their spouse who's also on Zoom, or their elder family members or whatever, is like time zones become a different thing. I have a colleague whose schedule now has to be, he lives in the East Coast, he's on standard time. He works 7 until 2 and then doesn't work, and then comes back and cleans out his inbox after his kids go to bed. And that's his time zone. So understanding people's time zones it becomes harder. And then you really need to use your calendar to block time that you can't use.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm hearing a couple of sort of themes emerge. I mean, the challenge of time zones in normal times really has to do with affiliation, involvement, contribution. How do we ensure we're getting the best of everyone and that everyone is weighing in on the right conversations as well as possible? And so COVID has removed some of those barriers, but now introduced some others, because now time also, well, time has always mattered, but now it starts to matter in some sort of novel ways. That it's not only about what geography you're sitting in, but what actual working hours are feasible, which may or may not track what would be expected for your time zone.
Yeah.
So that's pretty interesting. All right, so there's sort of a related theme that I wanted to hear from you on, and that has to do with, what does it look like to manage conflict and differences in COVID times? Now, a huge portion of my work pre-COVID was helping individuals and teams work through the friction that inevitably pops up here and there. And there's a whole bunch of skills that one can bring to those conversations. But I'll tell you what, one of the central pieces of advice that I always had for clients was, hey, as things start bubbling up, get off of email, get off of these virtual modes of communication. You need to get in a room together so you have the most access to, all the ways that we're communicating, and there's less chance for misunderstanding. Well, we don't have that now. So what is your experience and advice for navigating conflict effectively in a COVID world?
Yeah, it's so true. It's like our best tools have been stolen from us.
Mm-hmm.
People's body language and facial expression and the way that they deliver what they're saying, like there's more information in a conversation than there is in an email or a Slack. I'll do another one of my examples here. So like you can imagine a couple of people on the same team, we'll call them Roy and Jimmy, and they've been arguing about the best way to do something for like 3 days. Every day they show up for stand up and the team is like, what? I'm waiting for Roy and Jimmy to tell us where we're going. Like everyone's blocked and all they do is argue all the time. And in the before times, you can imagine that their manager either is in the office with them and can see them arguing. So it can be like, come here, come with me. We're going to go into a room with a door that closes and we're going to have the whole thing out. We're going to figure out the root of the problem. We're going to understand why you feel these ways, why you can't make a compromise. And we're going to get to an answer to unblock the rest of the team. Or even if the manager's in a different office, somebody else on the team might like flag, hey, this is going badly. And they can see that something is happening. Mm-hmm. And like the key things to do in that world is to make sure to communicate constantly and talk to the people that are not in the same office as you, or if they are, like be around so they can see you and you can see them and how they're interacting. Now you can't see it. So that argument might be happening in an email that only they're on, or in Slack in a direct message, and no one knows why every day they show up at stand up like this. So you need more than ever to have good communication with your team, just to be able to understand where they are. One-on-ones have always been an important part of managing people, and they're way more critical now. You can't miss one-on-ones. You need to even possibly think of doing them more often. I've actually found, especially with, I manage managers. So with my leaders, I tend to do an hour a week. I find that it's actually better to split that into 2 half-hour chunks so that I can be talking to them more often with their facial expressions and voice. It's also like, so how you would approach that, like once you figure out what's going on, you have to have those same conversations and you have to pull them together in a Zoom or a video conference, whatever tool your company is using, because it's the best tool we have. It's not good enough. It will never be good enough, but we have to make the best with what we have. And there's one other aspect to that I do want to touch on, which is a little bit sensitive. You can't make somebody turn their video on when they're in their own home and the company didn't pay for their office. You have no idea where these people are working, and you have no right to know that. It's really, really tricky thing to navigate, because you want the facial expressions. You want to see the people and see the emotions and see how they're reacting to what people are saying, but you can't force them to, which just adds another level of difficulty.
It totally does. And when you mentioned this last week to me, it stopped me short, because, I'm doing remote work with clients and with groups, and I'm desperate for people to turn their cameras on, and I'm wishing so I can get more clues and cues as to what's going on. I like to think I'm a tuned in person, but I completely missed that piece of it, that I wasn't thinking about. People are exposing, some of their personal environment that they may not want to. Things may be going on at home that, it's not anyone else's right to know. So that was a really big aha for me when you mentioned that. So one thing that I wonder if, as you're increasing the frequency of interacting with your leaders, your own managers, I'm wondering if you're also finding that you have to sort of go out of your way to like say more about your intentions, to check in more about impacts that you might not otherwise catch. That's one of the things that when I work with clients who can't get away from that remote environment, I'm often suggesting sometimes you have to work a little harder to explain what you meant, because otherwise people will react fast to that. So I'm curious if that's part of a change you're also making.
I find that I do that a lot, although I will also add that I'm scaling my role right now. So I might also be doing it for that reason. But I've been a lot more careful to proofread my written communication than I have in the past. I think there's multiple factors that feed into that, but I think that this is definitely one of them, making sure that what you typed is what you meant to say.
Yeah.
Because especially now back into the time zone thing, if I type something at 9 a.m. my time and my direct sees that at 9 a.m. his time, but it's noon mine and I'm eating lunch, and it like startles him in some way, right? Then all that the disconnect in the words I used, and then wait, did you mean it? Oh no, she hasn't answered yet. Oh no, it's bad. I don't want that to happen. So
Yeah.
being very careful about how I word things is important for a lot of reasons.
Yeah, that just reminds me of this other kind of phenomenon that happens, that we wonder if silence is a message. Like, I haven't heard back yet. Does that mean they're stewing and they're angry? Or does it mean they haven't seen it? Or no, I can see the read receipt. I know they've seen it, right? And so things can sort of churn faster and more furiously, it seems, in this environment. So sort of your advice on, just the more frequent touch points, and really being thoughtful about how you're communicating, I think sounds like good advice. So let me pick up on sort of one of the things that can generate conflict or disagreement, which is when a company undergoes some change in strategic direction. So when we talked last week, you mentioned that, hey, when we first went remote, it was fine because our team had a plan. They knew what to do. They could now just execute it from home. But, what happens when now there's a shift in company direction, which can be challenging even in normal times. So I'm curious, how do you handle that? What advice would you offer?
Yeah, and that's one that the longer the pandemic lasts, the more likely it will happen, because it's like companies go through change, or even just finish a project and go on to the next one. And like project kickoffs are the kinds of things that people often like get together for. Can't do that anymore. And larger scale changes are even harder. So I had another like imaginary scenario here, like Acme Industries. Acme Industries has been making widgets for years. They're not particularly useful to people, and during the pandemic, widgets involve shaking hands with people, let's say. And the company is pivoting now to make gadgets. Less handshaking, less touching, all better in the pandemic world. Now, there's two people who've been on the core widget team. We'll call them Trisha and Leon. Trisha and Leon have been working on that team for years. They know the area. They're very comfortable with their work. They both have young kids, but they're the leads of this team, and the rest of the team don't, and they're able to work around helping the other people who are more junior, maybe don't know the space as well, by talking frequently with them. But they have way more distractions at home than the rest of the team, and they're like the team experts, the leads of the team. In the before times, who would care? Nobody cares, right? They're the experts. They're going to be the experts. They're going to learn the new thing. You trust them to learn the new thing because they are, highly capable engineers or scientists or whatever it is that they are, and they can handle it. They communicate frequently with the team, make sure that there's like low friction, so you don't have to like be walking on eggshells with all those people who loved widgets so much and now they can't believe they have to make gadgets instead. But they can have lots of conversation and one-on-ones, and they fill their calendars in the before times. They would fill their calendars with talking to the other people on the team, talking to their leaders, understanding the context, understanding the new space. It would be a busy time and it would be maybe hard work, but they'd still have their life at home separate from their life at work, and it would be fine, it'd be great, they'd handle it. Now, like they can't fill their calendars. Filling their calendars is impossible. Leon only gets to focus on work when his kids are napping. Trisha's helping her kid with school all the time. So she's distracted every 15 minutes with mom, what is 5 plus 5? Right? Like, this might be an example of my own personal life. I have a 6-year-old. The kindergarten remote was a thing that I experienced. Again, like with those distractions, they don't have enough time to have all of the one-on-one conversations with the team. So they have to choose other tools. So that's when you get into the like well-articulated text communication, which can still be hard to do while you're distracted, but you can make progress on it in leaps as you're able to. And you may have to have more team meetings instead of more one-on-ones to make your schedule work. And they'll do their best. It'll be asynchronous, and they'll pull and rally the team and take turns. Maybe they can work together. But one of the things that I found fascinating, so I have a team like this, it turns out, where the two teams, so the dev and QA leads of this team are those distracted individuals. And their team of a total of about 12 engineers between them, actually 14, was like not a one of them has kids, which I found like fascinating. But then I started to realize, of course they don't. They're earlier in their career. They're generally younger. It's not a guarantee, but it happens. And it made me think a bit about the like structure of organizations and structure of teams, and how you're like, when you think about building a team and you think about building for diversity, you want to build for ethnic diversity and gender diversity and every other angle of diversity, because diverse teams build better products. There's many studies on that. I'm not going that way right now, but there's this other thing where the natural progression of career also plays a part in how you think about the team and how you approach, pivoting or making a big change on a team now that didn't matter before. I definitely it never occurred to me that team had 2 leaders with complicated home lives and 14 engineers without. It didn't matter to me before. I don't know that I have like lots of awesome tools about that right now, other than empathy and caring for the people that are on that team. A lot of what I try to do is help and step in there, but like, hey, I am also a distracted parent. We have to do the best we can and understand that not everyone is coming from the same vantage point.
Yeah, I mean, it almost sounds like, look, we can't there isn't an easy solve for everything that we're experiencing here. And that, there are just some structural barriers just for getting things done at the same level. I think when we talked last week, you talked about, distracted people are leading. And, we just can't remove the distraction factor. And so it sounds like you're saying, look, we've got to lean as well as we can on the imperfect tools that we do have available to us. But then it also sounds, right, you've mentioned this word empathy that I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about, because actually, as you've talked through each of these topics so far, I do hear a bit of a through line about, empathy seems to be playing a role in sort of everything that you're talking about. So could you expand on that?
Absolutely. And I'll say that should play a role in leading people regardless. Your team you are an individual contributor on your team has 10 people, your team has 40 people, it's a global team, they're still people. You're managing people, and they're understanding that every single one of them is a little bit different. And every one of you is under some level of stress. And you don't have to feel guilty if you're not the parent on the team. But as a leader of a team where there are some parents and some not, you do have to acknowledge that some of them might feel guilty that their life is easier. Some of them might be jealous of the people who get to take time off for their kids. And all of that is their real feelings. You have to accept that they're real parts of how people are feeling about their work, and you have to let them make space for it. Work-life balance is a thing that a lot of companies talk about when they're trying to hire people in the before times, especially. It's like, oh, you know, we're a family people who are like, well, your work-life balance is that your friends are your work coworkers. Not my thing, but cool for you. Your work-life balance, like everyone goes home. There's a whistle that blows. Everyone goes home and then they have their home life. Okay. Again, not my people. Oh, we all eat lunch together, but then we all go home at the end of the day. Those are my people. That's my preferred, like I have lots of friends at work who are my work friends. And then I have my friends at home who are my home friends. That's how I like to be. But now I can't see my home friends. I see my work friends on Zoom all day. And work-life balance with, you know, my kid around is just, there's no such thing. You know, she's in and out when she pleases, and there's only so much that I can do about that. And that's something that, you know, is going to, again, be different for every single person. Like, you can't assume that just because they have a toddler, two people with toddlers are having the same experience. And you can't assume that just because, oh, their kids are older, they're in high school, it must be easier for them.
Yeah.
No, not necessarily.
Yeah.
I hear some really terrible stories. It's all hard. Frankly, it doesn't matter. Everything about this is hard. So one of the things that my company at Sonos has done is we've instituted a thing called Care Time. And Care Time is a corporate decision that we are allowed up to 10 hours blocked in our calendar per week. It doesn't roll over. It's not like PTO, it's not vacation, but it's like, take care of your family and take care of yourself. You have kids, help them with their schoolwork. You don't have kids, you go grocery shopping when nobody else is there. You are having a mental breakdown because the world is this world that we live in right now. Take a nap. Take care of yourself. But it's not that people aren't doing that. They have to. We're all human. If you have the empathy to realize we are all experiencing this, you realize that people are doing this stuff anyway, but feeling bad about it. So by instituting it as a protected part of our culture, it has given us all permission to say, no, this is the time I need. And it makes it's culturally unacceptable to book time over somebody else's care time in their calendar. And that has given us a huge like leg up in how we treat each other with empathy, because nobody has to, you would never ask what they're doing on their care time. That's rude, but you know that that's protected. And that's been an amazing change that we've done.
When you shared this last week, there were a few of us on the call, and we were just like, oh my gosh, that is the coolest thing. Just this, novel and not widespread as far as I can tell.
I've definitely noticed that. I in the women in tech kind of whisper network spaces, there's a lot of moms sharing what different companies are doing. And I'm a lot of ways, I'm just proud to work at a company that does that. There are other companies doing other things. I shouldn't it's not that bad, but right. That culture of empathy thing is something that I feel is very powerful, because it lets you understand as a company or as a team that everyone is experiencing something that's awful. This is awful. Everything about a pandemic and racial inequality and the world we live in right now is just not good.
Yeah. So let me just comment on one aspect of empathy that I think is really powerful and in play, which is people are always wondering if they are getting treated fairly, right? We're always scanning our environment and looking at what are my peers getting, or what's happening? Am I being treated appropriately here? And so, that is going to show up in spades in this, in COVID times, right? As people who don't have children may be thinking, oh, is all the work getting pushed on me now? Because I've got a distracted, peer who can't, get their stuff done. Like, that doesn't feel fair. And then you have those who are caring for family members or children thinking, oh my God, am I going to be left behind because I can't deliver with the same volume that I could do in the before times? Like, everybody's got concerns. about fairness and is this appropriate and am I getting a fair deal? And I just love how Sonos has sort of, this care time policy, I think just speaks to that in such an elegant way. It's just, look, everybody needs some space here and some ability to care for themselves.
Yeah.
So, all right. So at this point, we've kind of touched on a number of themes. I'm imagining that there are some questions that have come in from those who are attending. And so at this point, I think Sarah has been, monitoring our Q&A. And so we'd love to hear what's rolled in, Sarah. Any questions to serve up here for Diane to respond to?
Sure. Thank you both. This is really a fascinating conversation. And first of all, I just want to encourage everybody to start populating the Q&A box. We'd love to answer your questions as they come through live. The first comment to come through is really more a comment about someone's particular experience, and maybe you both can elaborate on this a bit. This woman says, the company I work for also acknowledged that people have Zoom fatigue and that we don't always want to be on the camera. But as I think about how this relates to extra connectivity, we are all online, more connected all the time, and the expectations to be online and respond immediately are a lot. How do we manage that?
So how about it, Diane? I have a few thoughts, but I want to hear your perspective.
It depends a lot on your team and your manager and your structure of your organization together. The always online thing it's dangerous, and as a leader, I actually try to discourage that as much as possible because it sounds good. You get more time out of your team, except for that they're tireder and less well rested and not performing as well anyway. I would rather have 6 really good hours than 12 bad ones anytime. I would rather have the project get done, and I don't care how long you worked and how many of those hours you spent bouncing a baby on your knee, than to worry about whether it took you 20 hours.
What I would add to that comment is that, some number of us, don't get to our emails till late at night or sort of outside traditional working hours. And, even in pre-COVID times, this was a thing. And so one of the things that I am often coaching clients around is, hey, if you're responding to an email at 9 p.m., and especially if you're a leader of a team, it can be worth putting into your email, no response needed until, tomorrow. Don't reply to me tonight. If you're sending it on the weekend, send a reply on Monday. Please don't respond to me, in the overnight hours. So I think there's something to be said for being really explicit about sharing your expectation that people not be responding at all hours.
That's something I've definitely done. I have a manager read me. It's a thing that tech managers do sometimes, and it I very specifically articulate, I work between these hours. I might write stuff early in the morning because I do tend to look at Slack when I wake up. That's the thing I do. I don't expect responses. And if you did respond, I might not respond back. So I try to be as clear as possible about when I'm working. And I've also made it clear, this is getting way before COVID times, that once I eat dinner, I'm not looking at work. So, by the time I am sitting down with my family for dinner, work is done. And you have to call me or page me to get me to be back at work. So, being clear on what your expectations are is important.
Yeah, it's interesting. There may be a different, if you're the team lead, that's potentially easier messaging than if you're the individual contributor who wants or needs to set some boundaries, right? And so, you might have to, depends on the relationship you have with your manager and sort of what the culture of that team is. But you can consider, framing it as a request. Right. And,
yeah.
I'm going to be most focused and most attentive and most able to give my best work. If I can have sort of these, you can expect responses from me in these hours, but maybe not expect responses from me in those hours. Yeah. Right. So you can treat it as discussable and a request. If you don't feel
there are from the survey, there are a fair number of people here who have larger teams. Like even if you can set the stage in your team that you are clear about what hours you're working, even if you don't have control of the people above you, if you can protect your team, they can do better work when they're focused when they're working and not when they're not.
Yeah, great. Awesome.
Okay, we've had a couple more questions come in that are very timely related to tech and Wi-Fi issues. So I'm going to read those next. What advice do you have for team members who do not have good access to home internet and keeping connected with them? And then a similar question, my Wi-Fi is struggling as well. How do you handle tech inequality between members of your team?
Yesterday, I called one of my team members on his cell phone because the video was not working and he had there was an echo and neither of us knew why. So I called him on a cell phone and we talked old school on a phone. You do basically do what you can. You can't, this is in the same category as you can't require people to have their video on. Do the Zoom with the video off. That can work. Use the tools like I was mentioning before, like Google Docs and Figma are both pretty good about the asynchronous co-editing stuff. So that can work well because you don't have to have the best connection to the internet. You just have to have a connection to the internet to make that work. It's about empathy. Like you have to understand that they can't control it, especially depending on where they live. There might not be a better option. So, and then, if there is a better option, but maybe your company could pay for it. Mine doesn't. I know that some are. It might be a conversation to have with leadership, especially if it's like a prolonged problem in certain areas of the country or something like that.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Remembering that back in the olden days, we didn't have the internet. Like, how did we get work done then? It's like, oh my gosh, telephones. I forget that I can actually make phone calls to people because I'm so out of that habit. So I think it sounds like it boils down to, again, this is both an empathic response. It's also like, hey, we just got to be attuned to sort of equitability here. And just if phone is going to be the best mode of communication, right? I think you just, let's create the defaults that are going to work best for individuals or across the team. Great. Good. What else? Other things people are wondering about, Sarah?
Yes, sure. This is another interesting one. I've started with a new company as a people leader since the start of working from home. I've had some success with getting up to speed with the hard data aspects of the business. However, picking up on the softer cultural aspects has been more challenging. Any advice on how to help pick up on what you can typically see with hallway conversations, lunches, etc.?
That's a good question.
That sounds hard.
Yeah.
And so I've been interviewing for somebody else to join the company, on the interview panel, and I've actually asked it as an interview question. What will you do when you arrive here and you don't have hallway conversations to figure out how everything works? Because I don't know. It sounded like a great interview question for these folks, and I got three very different answers from three different people. I think one of the ones that resonated the most was they talked about chaining their one-on-one conversation. So they'd ask their new manager, their leader, who should I get to know first, and then ask all of those people, who should I get to know and who should I get to know, to try to feel out the organization through a web of people, which seems reasonable. But that's like figuring out who all the people are. It's not necessarily figuring out the culture. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, part of it, I wonder if, leaders, this might be something for leaders to really tune into. And I wonder if things like, hey, let's invite, as part of onboarding, let's invite these brand new people to the organization to sit in on meetings that they actually wouldn't normally be part of, but it gets them some exposure to conversations that they're not going to see in the normal course of their work, but might help them start to make some sense of how, others who have been here for a while tend to interact. I mean, I don't have great ideas myself, and I'm not, but I think part of what we're trying to get at is how do we get exposure to a wide variety of interactions and conversations where we pick up some of the clues and cues about how things work. And so I wonder if a combination of sort of this networking approach that you're talking about, and then maybe just making requests of your own leadership, you know, I think it could really accelerate sort of my my learning curve if there were certain kinds of meetings that would be okay for me just to sit in on. You know, camera off, muted, but it just helps me get a lay of the land in a way that might be quicker than will otherwise happen.
It sounds like a good idea to me. It's
Okay.
hard.
Go ahead, Dan. I didn't mean to cut you off.
I know. I'm just thinking of all the ways in which that would be hard.
Yeah.
So I acknowledge the person who asked that question. That sounds hard.
It's interesting. I'm working with a client right now where they're going through a big strategic change. And so we're doing sort of a learning curriculum, right? How do we manage and deal with change? And it's interesting. COVID is like this undercurrent, but it's not the central topic of conversation. So we're all just making do as best we can in this curriculum. And I've been surprised the number of people in my courses who are, oh, I'm a new hire. I've been here for 3 weeks. And, you know, so they're experiencing what this person was asking about. How do I get up to speed here? And again, I think putting them into they've been put into some cohorts where they're interacting with people that they won't interact with in their normal day-to-day work, right? So it is expanding their network of people that they can then reach out to.
And that is what the next set of questions is about, is new hires. How do you have any thoughts on integrating new employees who are hired post-COVID? How can their getting started experience or their feeling of belonging to the community or being part of the culture be made smoother if it's all remote and virtual? And related, of course, any suggestions for bringing newly hired team members on board remotely?
Yeah, a little bit of what we were talking about with the leader, but now as an IC that I have seen and worked with, what we've done for folks is we'll have them have normal in the pre-times. They would go out to lunch with the team because it's a great way to, like, you spend a few hours together, you chit chat, you understand how they all interact with each other. So what we'll do now is we'll set them up with a one-on-one with every single person on the team, all of them. Which I actually think is better, because in a like lunch situation with like 10 people at a table, you're going to end up talking to the 2 or 3 people that are right around you more than everyone. And it also has that, like, everyone's looking at me, which is tricky. And then after they've had a one-on-one with everyone on the team, they have like a team happy hour thing, which, by the way, is difficult in the time zones thing again. So we actually tend not to do happy hours. We call it brunch, and we have breakfast on the West Coast and lunch on the East Coast at the same time. And that's the kind of like socialization that the teams will do. That works like on the team. You don't want to try to do that at like the scale of like 50 or 100 people. Like that's like a 15 to 20 person max. But that gives both, like, I get to meet every single person on the team and I get to kind of interact with the whole team together.
Diane, I'm curious so let's say somebody had their team of people was actually all local, you know, but still we're working from home, we're not on site. I am curious about, you know, in some geographies, dining outside is, you know, has been deemed to be sort of a lower risk kind of way. We're masked, we're distanced, but we're, you know, we can look at each other. I'm curious, I don't know if that would be an approach that could be useful, but I'm also wondering, you know, are companies thinking about potential liabilities of sanctioning or encouraging in-person interaction at this point?
My gut there is, as a leader, I would never suggest it. If folks decided that they wanted to do that, I would not attend. And the reason I would not attend is because I would want to give them permission to also not attend. If I, as a leader, showed up for something like that, I suspect that everyone on the team would think they had to. And I don't want anyone to feel like they have to put their physical life at risk for work. So I would be inclined to kind of ignore people who decided that they wanted to do that and let them. Like, I'm not going to stop them because it's also their life and their choice to do so, but I wouldn't encourage it and I would not attend.
Yeah, this is a good perspective. Great.
So
Also,
another
that sucks because I miss people.
Completely. Yeah.
Another question that's come through, which I think is interesting related to the remote management, Alessandro writes, because so much communication is happening over email, individual folks' tone over email has become more and more important. Any suggestions for coaching direct reports on email tone and communication? Sometimes requests sound like demands, and the old idea of best assumptions of others' intent is getting lost.
I have lots of thoughts on this. I do a lot of work with people around this, but yeah, you want me to? Okay. So you're absolutely right that tone is really, really hard to read. As soon as you go away from an in-person communication, if you go to phone, you lose body language as a set of clues about what people intend. And if you go to chat and email, you now lose tone of voice as a moderator of people's underlying intention. And so email in particular, chat, typing, all that, it's an atonal medium. But the problem is, as human beings, we're desperate to understand tone. And so we will inject tone into just words on a screen, even where none may have been intended. I mean, think about the last time you accidentally sent an all caps email, right? The person receiving that email thought you were shouting at them, when maybe it was just the slip of your finger on the keyboard. So managing tone and being sure that you're being understood appropriately, that's always been a challenge, even more important now since we're relying a lot on email communication. So a couple of things that I usually coach people around email communication. One is sensitive and controversial issues probably need to not be done initially by email, or as the temperature starts to rise, or you notice yourself having a reaction, like you want to get to phone, you want to get to some kind of live synchronous exchange so that you can get a little bit more actual dialogue going. You can hear their tone of voice differently. Oh, that was a joke, right? It didn't read as a joke over email. So that's one thing that can help. And by the way, email in particular is not dialogue. It is serial monologue. It's speech making one at a time. And so it's worth remembering that people might start having a reaction to the second sentence that you wrote because a word triggered them in some way. And then they miss or they overreact, or, now they're just emotionally triggered by it. So there's a lot of hazards there. So a couple things: get off of that medium quicker than you would otherwise. Another good uses for email are to document an exchange you've had. If you need sort of the written record, hey, it was great talking to you, so here's what we agreed to, right? Great to document a live conversation that you had over email. Over communicate your purpose or your intentions. You sort of have to work harder to help people understand what you're trying to say. I mean, I think emoticons are probably still not fully acceptable in business communication, but I'll tell you what, emoticon, that could be changing, and maybe that will rapidly change in this world. But, that's been our attempt to inject tone back into this medium that doesn't naturally have it. So those are a few thoughts. I don't know, Dan, would you add more to that?
I just double down on the emoticons thing, although I think that probably is a company culture thing. And one of the other parts of our culture is like email really is where we just document decisions. We rarely use it for conversation. It's all Slack, and Slack has react emojis. And the react emoji is like, it's just a plethora of ways to try to apply facial reaction to to a non-facial communication.
Yeah.
It it works better in teams that know each other.
Yeah.
The longer this goes on and the more the team changes because new hires or change or reorganization or whatever, the harder things like that will be, because maybe that emoji with like the sweat tear is like means a slightly different thing to one person than it does to somebody else who thinks it's a tear. Right?
Yeah. Wait, that's a sweat tear?
There's two. There's one like this and one like that. Yeah.
Oh my God.
I also
You're rocking my world, Diane.
I have had way too many conversations with my VP about emojis. So
Okay. All right. I could go on. I am looking at our time though. I think we need to start wrapping things up. I want to thank you so much, Diane, just for the experience and the wisdom and the thoughtfulness that you've brought to this really big topic. Hopefully it's the start of conversation. It's not the final word, of course. But I also want to say, the suggestions and advice and the practices that you are engaging your team with, it's valuable, right? I'm hearing that, both in the quality and timing of the personal interactions you're having with them, but also up to the company policy level. You're really making adjustments sort of based on, a real sense of empathy for what your people need. And in that way, I think, your experience is really hearkening back to something that's been true in the leadership field for years and years and years, which is your people are your best resource. They're your most important resource. And in fact, I think what you're demonstrating is empathy is really a winning business strategy. We need it more than ever to keep our teams together and thriving in these times. So I really want to thank you for that. And I'm going to let Kevin have some final closing words here. Thanks, Diane.
No, thank you very much, Stacy. And those were wonderful and full of wisdom in what you just said. And I just wanted to thank you both because one of the things that always amazes me is at the Gordon Institute, all of our faculty we come from the industry. We all come from the real world and lived through the crisis. And as I listened to today's panel, it is so steeped with real world experiences. The real world's messy. The real world is not black and white. And at the end of the day, the real world is fundamentally about people. And it's about having that empathy that Diane referred to, about really having compassion for everyone on your team, not because it's practical, but because it's right. And because that's the kind of world that we all want to live in. So I want to thank you all for joining this panel today. I do hope this is a starting conversation. For those of you who have not had any contact with the Gordon, please do look us up. Well, we're part of the School of Engineering at Tufts, but we serve all the university needs, and we like to think that we serve all the community needs. For those of you, particularly in the technology area, but any industry, with your challenges in these trying times, as you continue to power forward and build meaningful organizations that have high impact in our society. So thank you very much for taking the time today. Thank you, Diane. Thank you, Stacy. We look forward to connecting again.